Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave, on behalf of every father and every mother, wings for freedom. On behalf of our warriors, and paves the way for a new history.
Hello everyone. Hello Stan. Thank you very much for joining us so late, which I guess is fantastic for American friends who have sort of early afternoon entertainment. For European friends who are probably going to bed, sleep tight. So anyway, Stan, welcome again on Tochnyi. How do you do?
Thank you for having me.
Always. For those who don't know him, first of all, where have you been? Secondly, it's the third time that Stan is here. Please hit the like button if you have an option. Not that I know where it is, but yes. What else is interesting to say? Yes, so it's the third time that Stan is among us. The first time we got to talk about the production of planes. The second time we had a sort of rundown of the year 2024, and now we're going to be speaking about another subject that Stan has studied and come up with a lot of things to say. It's very interesting. It's an important subject, albeit it's one that is sometimes difficult to grasp. So what it's going to do is a true public service. So Stan, do you want to tell us what subject we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, so we're going to focus on the Russian automotive industry, which in part is directly related to the war because companies like KAMAZ have 40% of their production going directly to the Russian armed forces. Other companies like Ural have more like 90 to 95% of their production right now going to the Russian defense industry. And apart from that, it's a big civilian industry sector that's seeing a lot of difficulties right now.
Okay, so important, interesting, timely. That's great. But before that, I've got 2-3 questions to ask you about other things. The first one, of course, is the Pope is dead. It's not a secret that you're Bulgarian, so you have a very special perspective on these matters. Please share.
I haven't been to a church in 5 years. I wouldn't know where to begin with. I have once had a Catholic girlfriend and it went poorly, so that's all I can say.
Oh yeah, no, I was referring to, when was it? 1992? 1982, when that Bulgarian spy tried to kill the Pope. Sorry, the joke completely fell flat. That's all right. I'm used to it.
I don't have those ambitions right now, and I don't think that it worked out for him either because of what happened with him afterwards.
What happened to him after? I mean, beside the whole jail thing.
He became a recluse. He was only communicating with his mother. He had a very isolated life.
Okay, well, all right. So, well, kids, you heard it here first. Don't kill the Pope. More interestingly, there's actually quite a lot of things that have been going on on the Russian economic front. One of them is there's a lot of movements on the budget side. Have you followed? Like, is it worth paying attention to, or is it just noise?
No, it's actually worth paying attention to it because for the first time, Russian Finance Minister Silvanov actually said that they should be more modest in their ambitions. So he's actually indirectly talking about doing budget cuts. And they actually, I think yesterday, they revised the budget deficit. So it went from their expected 0.5% of GDP to 1.7% of GDP based on the oil price and the stronger ruble, because their oil tax is a combination of the price of the dollar and the coefficient between the Urals and ESPO oil, and then the price of a barrel in USD.
Yeah, so we should pay attention to this and potentially talk about this so at some later date. And on the Ukrainian front, though, it's always interesting to talk about Ukraine and remember that the Ukrainian economy is also on the line, and also doing surprisingly well. And they're super courageous, and they should be held for what they're doing. But there's the whole. They finally signed the mineral deal today. Like, have you had time to look into it, or is like you don't know yet what's underneath it?
I haven't had the time to look at it. I'm more focused on what's happening with the Russian news on the Russian economy. I'm not primarily focused on the Ukrainian side of things. I just saw that they signed it, and it's the first part out of 3 parts, I think. But I haven't had the time to go into it.
Okay, well, we'll try to find a way to bring this sort of information in Tochnyi then. I've been talking for about 5 minutes, so I think we can. But I do have one last question, sort of follow-up question to your first intervention on Tochnyi, which was about the aircraft industry. Have you seen something new? Because there were a lot of talks, but it's always difficult to sort the grain from the shaft and to understand what's going on. So, do you have an update on this subject? Because you had left us the last time on it's mayhem and it's never going to work.
So what they've done is they've managed to retrofit an SSJ-100 plane that's a test bed for the new domestically produced components. They've managed to fit it with entirely domestic components, and they've managed to also fit it with domestic engines. Although it's making dual flights, it's making sometimes flights with the French engines, and sometimes it's making flights with the domestic engines. But they still have only, I think, a couple of dozen of test flight hours. So if they want to start production in 2026 for the SJ-100, they're still behind schedule. They'll need a lot more flights to get it ready and certified.
Okay, but they did manage to get at least a foot through the door.
Yes, but that was expected, although it's a bit faster than I expected because the engine that it's using, the PD8, did a complete redesign at the end of 2023. So on that regard, they're doing better than I expected. But in terms of production schedule, they're still behind their own schedules. They're not going to start production of any type of airliner this year. Serial production, that is.
Okay. Okay, good. Just one point of order. I am not able to answer the chat, or I don't know how to. So I see your messages, but I cannot answer. So let's move on to the car industry. So let's imagine for a second that you're a Russian private person trying to buy a car. Are you in a good position for doing this, or is it going to be an uphill battle?
It's going to be an uphill battle. So there's availability of cars, but the problem is pricing and financing. If you want to buy a car that's below 2 million, so something between 1 million and 1.5 million, you want it new, I think
Stan, 2 million, we're talking about rubles, right? So that's like $20,000.
Something like
thereabouts.
Yeah. No, 2 million. Yeah, 2 million rubles is closer to 22, 23, but yes. So
okay,
if you,
yes. No. So you were signing. So you need to pay $25,000 to buy a car, a new car.
Yes, we're talking about new cars, and in this case, yes.
But they're still available.
They're still available. There actually is a lot of them available. It's just that the pricing, because if you want to buy domestic cars, they've risen up in price a bit. Not as much as light commercial vehicles, because there, for example, a Gazelle van has doubled in price in the last 3 years alone. Cars like Ladas have gone up a bit in price, but you can buy them. The problem is financing for those cars. If you buy a new car, the average interest rate on a new car loan is 18.4% right now. On a used one, you'll get to 27%. The other thing is, if you want to,
So on top of the $20,000 that you need to pay, you basically would have to add like $5,000 to buy a new car, and a little bit more to buy an old car, a second-hand car.
Yes.
Well, that's steep.
It's steep, but that's again the affordable product. If you want to go with foreign imported cars, you can go with the Chinese ones, but they're more expensive because right now there is a recycling fee on those cars that starts at something like $5,000 for a car on top of customs tax, and the customs is something like 25% in this case, I believe.
Okay, yeah, of course. But I thought the China. Okay, no, let's stay on the purchasing side. So the problem you're saying is purchasing a car is getting more and more expensive, in great part due to the fact that the credit side of the equation is becoming more expensive. But this can still buy cars, be them Russian or imported from China.
Yes.
Okay, so do they buy them? Does it have an effect on purchases or not?
They were buying them a lot in 2024 because we had a lot of deferred demand, and it was just before this recycling fee was going to be introduced and the new customs tax was going to be introduced. So that's why in 2024 you saw something like 1.57 million being sold. That's a high level for the past several years. Right now in 2025 we expect them to sell less than 1 million maybe. So that's a huge drop. And that deferred demand somewhat saturated the market to the point where right now the issue isn't so much the availability, it's that people are unable to buy them, again, due to financing and costs, and the dealerships are sitting on a lot of inventory. So imports have slowed down.
Okay, I get it. All right, and so demand is down due to the fact that it's less affordable and that purchases have been pushed forward. So now there's less demand. Right.
There's also the thing that who are the people buying cars on credit? So because of the policy of the Russian Central Bank, it's not just raising the interest rate. There's also macroprudential measures to prevent people from getting too much into debt. So 60% of the loans that were being taken out to buy cars were taken out by people who, as part of their official income, 50% went to debt servicing. Now those people are no longer eligible to buy cars, so get new loans, at least easily. They would get a severe, a lot more in terms of interest, and the banks want to stay away from them because they also need to set up additional reserves for such clients because they're considered much more riskier.
Yeah, of course. And the only one happy about it are the military recruiters who can were happy to see people in debt because if they go to war, their debt is erased. So, well, if they don't get in debt, it means that they have less incentive to go to war. It's actually a good thing. All right. So the financing of those, but wait a second, because don't Russians get paid better now? Hasn't there been a very large rise of wages that should translate in higher demand, or maybe even to a shift of demand towards regions that used to be poorer and that now have received a lot of money since the invasion and could could do with new cars?
Well, no, because the cars that are on offer for the lower prices are Ladas, and people would prefer to get, for instance, a Korean car. There's not that many around to buy right now. The other thing is, with initially the Chinese cars, they had also issues with servicing and spare parts, because that was a new market for them. Again, that's something that doesn't make a lot of people enthusiastic. And if you want to buy a second-hand European car, again, the prices of spare parts, because they have to be parallel imported, are a contributing factor to the decrease in demand. And the final bit is Russian salaries went up, but not so much in the people who were mostly buying the cars. Like I said, 60% were coming from people who were barely making ends meet. So those sales are now gone. And without them, a lot of the sales that were happening are down to new clients that they want to search with a good credit history. And Russia is becoming a country where the people with savings are much fewer than the people without savings.
Oh, that's super interesting, because the BOFIT, the Bank of Finland Research Institute, a few months back had this big thing on the shift of precisely banking, like, how do you say, the amount of money that was in bank accounts. And of course, Moscow and St. Petersburg were huge, but within the provinces, it started to shift towards the regions that are sending the most people to war, and that had a large impact on that sector. It's very interesting if you say that, however important this may be, and it had some impact on, for instance, the construction market in those regions, it's not so important that it is actually reinvigorating the demand for the car sector. That yes, there was a little bit of an economic spring there, but it's not sufficient for it to be perceived in such an important sector as the car industry. Yeah, thank you very much. That's important. Just so you said they sold 1 million 1 million car last year.
1.5, almost 1.6.
Oh, okay. And this year that they're about to sell just one. They're expected to sell
Less
one.
than 1 million, yeah, maybe. Yes.
Okay. Do you know if the current issues they have with the exchange rate and the lower the budget being, would you say it's going to have an impact on the car market, or it's sufficiently different for it not to be impacted?
The budget, there's a thing like a point system for state companies, for state entities to buy cars. So a car has to have sufficient number of points for domestic production for it to be considered to be bought in a state auction. But that's a small part of the car sales. What's going to have more of an impact is the state laws that are being passed and what the central bank is doing. The budget, not so much. The budget, the only thing that they're considering right now is maybe a return to preferential lending for cars. So for cheaper cars that are domestically produced, families with children can get a preferential loan at something like 6 or 8% interest and get a car that way. But again, that will stimulate only a few producers. In this case, primarily Lada, and then maybe to a degree Moskvich, Gaz, Was, that sort of thing.
Okay, just for me to have an idea, most cars purchased now are Russian. They're from Russian brands, or is the majority from other countries imported? Well, not imported, but produced.
The majority is from China. So
okay.
Lada has something like a 33-34% share of the Russian market, or something around there. So last year, 1.5 million cars were sold. Lada managed to sell 436,000 out of those. So that's sort of the market they're dealing with. Lada and the other Russian car brands have been pushed out of the market to an extent by the foreign cars. There's also the production size. Lada sold 436,000. It managed to produce 500,000 cars. So even if it had sold everything, it would not have saturated the market, the demand in the market. The demand is primarily being fed by Chinese cars, and with the recycling fees that were being introduced by the government at the behest of Lada, so that you pay extra taxes, a lot more extra taxes for Chinese cars. What the Lada was trying to do, Avtovaz, the builder of Lada, they were trying to secure for them a market spot. So ensure that they weren't being killed over at the corner by Chinese brands. And what they've managed to do in effect is actually kill the new car market, because everyone is down. So in Q1, car sales across the board were down 25%. More for Chinese brands, less so for Russian brands. And in April, that's continued to another 33% decrease compared to April 2024. So that's the story right now. They've managed to essentially kill demand successfully. And they're doing more laws that will, yeah.
If we want to be, let's say, I don't want to say nice, I want to say understanding maybe. That's actually what you would expect in a war economy. You need to kill the civilian demand in order to concentrate more on the production of the goods necessary to wage the war. So there's almost a method to that madness.
Yes, but the problem with that is that they've killed civilian demand for Lada. Lada also has some items that are bought by the military, and Lada was already sitting on 120 billion rubles of debt, which is only growing more, and the company hasn't released any financial statistics because they probably look terrible, because it's building something like 40,000 cars per quarter more than it can sell. And that's not going anywhere. That's sitting in their dealerships. So the average size of a lot of dealership stock inventory was around 60,000 cars. That was the OK stats. Now it's over 120,000, and they're worrying what to do to sell more cars. That is why you see the rapid introduction of new preferential lending, so that the state doesn't have to bail out Lada again. In a way, they're bailing them out again, but for a different measure. And we're seeing the same thing with trucks. And there, the share of the military industry is much bigger. So because of measures that are taken in the truck industry and in freight delivery, KAMAZ went from having 20 billion rubles in profit in 2023 to only 730 million in profit in 2024. And in 2025, for Q1, they went to 12 billion rubles, 12.5 billion rubles of losses this quarter. And on top of that, their debt rose from 144 almost billion rubles to 225 billion rubles within a year. So that's killing these companies.
Shit! Wait! That's a lot of numbers in one swoop. So let's try to break it down. But the last one you just said is their debt has increased 85% in 1 year?
More like 50% or something. From 114, I don't want to live math, but from 144 billion to 225, so something like 80 billion, closer to 60%, I think.
Okay, yeah, but still massive, absolutely massive.
Yes.
Like in any other sector anywhere else in the world, that would ring enormous alarm bells, unless you're in the most, the fastest growing sector in the economy might have this sort of numbers, but that's about it, right?
And their sales are dropping, and they reported a 12 billion loss for the first quarter in 2025. So things aren't getting better; they're getting worse.
Okay, I do want to return to the companies, but I do have one question on the demand side. You mentioned the military, and I'd be very interested to dig just a little bit more in this direction. So basically what we've seen is the whole donkey situation. with the front line being fed with supplied with donkeys rather than motorized vehicles. Okay, it's an image. It probably doesn't happen everywhere, but it's representative of a problem. So on the one hand, you've got a clear demand that is not being matched, and on the other hand, you're saying that they're not selling enough. So what is the communication between those two apparently contradictory observations?
They are selling trucks to the military, but only 30% of the production of KAMAZ goes to the military. They have to sell 20,000 trucks a year at least. And we're talking heavy trucks to make ends meet. In 2023, when they were doing okay, they sold 26,000 heavy trucks. But in 2024, they sold only 20,500 trucks. The military just can't absorb 100% of the production. It doesn't have the money, it seems, to do that, or the drivers to put in those trucks, even if it buys them. Another example is WAS, which everyone knows for the bukhanka, or loaf as they call it. Its bukhanka sales are actually down by half this year. And it's because even though it's the most affordable thing that the military can buy at 1.5 million rubles, they are not being able to buy more than 600-700 of those a month. It's just they don't have the ability to purchase this many vehicles. The production of Russian companies is geared towards the working civilian market, not just to replenish military losses in heavy trucks, which mostly those aren't happening. It's mostly lighter vehicles and assault vehicles that are being destroyed.
Yeah, that's super important to remember. It's that however massive the Russian army might appear, and however big the budget might appear, they're still a little bit on a shoestring, and they're still limited by both the side of the economy and the size of the budget itself. Which how many loaves did you say they bought a year?
I think it was a month. I have to put all my stats, but for example, the sales of WAS for the first quarter were something like 4,900 vehicles, with the bukhanka for the quarter selling 2,148 vehicles. And that's for the entire first quarter. So you can split that 2 months and you get something like 700 and a bit for a month. And the military is the main buyer of the bukhanka in this case. Also, that's a vehicle
Okay,
that...
wait, it's 750 per month, but both civilian and military?
Yes, for the bukhanka, yes. That's the entire production.
Wow. This is, considering how fast they get destroyed, this is pretty amazing. Okay,
yes.
Yeah.
And the factory actually doesn't want to build them. The factory wants to move to a position where it's mostly building Chinese-based SUVs, and they're mostly assembling things. So they want to close down their body kit workshop, where they make all metal body kits for the bukhankas. They don't want to use that anymore. They want to streamline their engine line, so they have less engines to focus on and have more profit out of those engines. They don't want to actually build these vehicles anymore. They want to move to newer models. They want to close down that production line. It's not seen as profitable for them.
Gosh. Okay, good to know. Okay, so let's move definitely to the production side of the equation. Do you want to speak first about the financial situation, or do you want to have a look in the factories and the assembly lines?
We can look overall for the production of vehicles. For example, for the car market, we saw that actually in Q1, the production of domestic cars rose by 7.1% compared to Q1 to 176,000, but the sales dropped, like I said, 25%. For Lada, they fell 33%, And in April, again, we saw a 33% drop for the new car market overall. So Russian car manufacturers are making cars without actually being able to sell all of them. Now, there are some exceptions. For example, there's the former Kia plant that was in St. Petersburg, I believe. They are selling only, I think, 22,000 cars per year, new cars. And they're using basically a leftover assembly kit supply for 70,000 cars. So in their case, they're basically making things that are already there. So they're selling as much as they're making because they're not making that many, and they're making essentially Korean vehicles, which the market demands.
Oh wow, yeah. Which actually just a thought beside it, but shows how ill prepared the whole war was, because I assume that had the government shared the information that there was going to be a war and following crisis, they could have prepared a lot better than this. But yeah, because they decided to play games, no one got prepared. Don't mean to say it's not a good thing, but it's quite interesting. Okay, so they're trying to buy. Well, it takes us back to the one thing I think everyone knows about the Russian car factories at the moment, is that they at least in 2022, 2023, they were struggling to produce, let's say, modern cars. They had to drop the airbags. They had to drop almost everything. They had to revert to old models where you couldn't, turn the wheel and change the speed at the same time, or this sort of things. How are the cars themselves? Like, are they decent, or have the quality been lowered considerably?
So the cars themselves have improved. The airbag issue is no longer on the table. They've managed to find suppliers. And like I said, some of them are actually building kits from pre-existing stock, or importing kits from China, which are kits for sometimes components of the cars are Western, just produced in China. So those work better. The problem is more that when they're building decent cars, using them isn't that great. So, for example, when we're talking about the Gazelle, which is the most commonly used minivan in Russia, the problem is that if you want to find spare parts for it, the parts inside are Western. So it's a Cummins engine. You need to change the gearbox. Again, it's a Western gearbox. You have to find parts from outside of Russia. There isn't that big of an availability of spare parts. And with Lada, you have similar things. So when taxi companies try to use Ladas, they complain that officially there should be enough spare parts. But if you have a taxi company and you're looking for spare parts actively because your car breaks down, let's say every 2 weeks because you're driving it hard and fast on city roads, and you're overstretching the ability of that car. Not that, for example, Russian roads outside of cities are great for cars either, but in regards to driving inside a city, a taxi driver is using the car a lot more than your average Russian. They can't find car parts for Lada in sufficient amounts either. We had an example with a taxi company that took up a fleet of 100 Ladas, and it ended up with 40% of the time the Ladas being in the garage waiting for parts or needing to be repaired. And these are brand new Ladas, which shouldn't be happening for those cars. They ended up being twice as more expensive as servicing Korean brands.
Wow. Well, yeah, and that's true that the car market does have ramification for, like, across the whole industry, be it, like as you mentioned, the taxis and transport for the supply chains and all these things. So like when they have a problem, the whole economy is having a problem. So just like let's take a step back. When you're talking about the car industry in Russia, I'm talking from a Western European point of view, where in most countries in Western Europe, the car industry is the number one employer in the country. So is it the case as well in Russia?
No, because the volumes are much more. Like I said, Lada, which is the biggest producer, has 476,000 cars being produced a year. Russia is a country with 146 million people. They're not enough to employ the entire country. And then when you get to the truck side, the biggest producer is Kamaz, which we said heavy trucks, something like 20,000 is okay for them. Then we go to smaller producers. Gaz, for example, makes only 1,200 heavy trucks a year. The rest is LCVs. And like I said, WAZ only has 4,900 sold for the entire Q1. They have smaller workforces than you'd expect. But even then, they're facing issues on that regard. For example, WAZ continues to look for 800 people that it can't find to completely staff its factory, and it's been looking for those people since the start of last year. I've been tracking, and they've been floating around 800, 850 people, 830 people for an entire year when the stats on how many people they're looking for in the regional news are published.
Wait, okay, that's super interesting. So let me take a little bit of a time off. Among the many things you're tracking, there's this, you're looking at employment opportunities, and what you look at it not only in the main on the statistics, you also look at it in the newspapers in the regions. It's basically your Sunday is devoted to this. And what you're telling us is that those car factories are having problem recruiting. So I guess there's two questions there. One of them is, where are they in the geography of Russia? Are they concentrated in a special region, or is it across the whole of Russia that they have this problem? And the second question is, how does it fit with their overproduction? How can they be missing workers and overproduce at the same time?
They are spread all over Russia. So there's car factories in a lot of parts of Russia. Some are not working, like for example the ex-Volkswagen factory in Kaluga isn't working. It's been bought by a new entity, but it's yet to start being fully operational. And the other thing, I think they're overproducing because they're going to get attention if they produce a lot of vehicles. That's how you get attention to the industry. Now, that's not always beneficial for them, as we see they're overproducing to the point that there's no demand for their cars. And there's especially no demand for trucks, which is an even bigger issue. But that's why they also get interest from the Kremlin, which can quickly say, okay, release new lending so that people can buy more cars, because they want to keep the civilian industry alive, to showcase that, yes, GDP is growing, even though the Russian industry, the civilian side, is headed for a recession, it seems.
Okay, thanks. I was trying to look at the Lada stock price. All right, so the factories are having recruiting issues. Would you say that that's their main problem at the moment from a production point of view, or would you say that, like, for instance, the machines they're using are also creating a problem, or would you say the supply side of the question is the most important problem compared to just the workforce?
The workforce is only part of the problem. I think right now it's not so much the supply side, it's the demand side. There have been steps taken within the Russian economy that have made it so that the Russian truck industry and the Russian car industry are put in a bad position right now in terms of finding sales. They can manage to supply parts. They've managed to overcome that difficulty. They've managed to produce record for the near-term amounts of vehicles. What they haven't managed is to fully staff, but they've managed to overcome that and to find actual buyers for this volume that they want to build.
Okay, yeah, very clear. So, and this arcs back to the financial problem that the buyers have. So you started to mention precisely, since we're on the matter of finances, you started to mention the financial health of those companies. Would you say you said already that the debt has increased by very large amounts. Like, are they in trouble? Or can they count on the state to help them, or would you say that there's a chance for some of the big names to falter in the near future?
They might, like I said, with WAS, they might limit their line of models. With LADA, they also have a lot of expensive debt. They have a 120 billion worth of debt, and that's the last time we know about it. The debt with KAMAZ, for example, which grew so much, part of it is also them issuing debt, directly bonds on the Russian bond market. There is a chance for the state to come help them because these are, after all, state-owned enterprises. And the state, well, some of them are state-owned, but the state has an interest in keeping them open, but we don't know at what point. So they might incur losses. They might cut people who are working there. They're still increasing salaries, something that they see mentioned in the chat. For example, WAS is going to increase salaries by 10% this summer. So they're doing that regularly. They're paying close to or above 100,000 rubles, which is sort of okay, above the median wage in Russia. But they might actually cut the workforce because of these production issues. And for some things, there's no solution in sight. Like I said, for Russian trucks, because the freight market is dead and people are paying for road freight what they were paying 10 years ago, I think something like 30% of Russia's truck companies that were doing truck logistics went out of business. Now, that doesn't tell us as much as we would like to know, because it could have been just the 30% that are the smallest companies or single person driving a truck. But because we know how much the freight price has dropped, we know that that's a severe problem. And right now, there's enough of a supply in warehouses of dealers for an entire year's worth of truck sales, so that they can stop importing, they can stop building trucks for an entire year, and there'll be enough to satisfy the demand and then some. There's something like 65,000 trucks in storage right now, because there's no one buying new trucks because of the financing, because of the issues in the trucking industry. And there, I don't see how the state can help apart from just buying all of the production of KAMAZ at an expensive cost to the state, which is already looking to make budget cuts.
Okay, and they cannot be good either for the car sales.
Oh no, it's not. Car sales are, for example, Chinese car sales are down 44%. In some cases, they're down over 50%. But that is sort of okay for Russia, because apart from Haval, the rest of the Chinese brands only invested in two things: marketing and dealerships. And there's an expectation that this year, 10% of the dealerships and around 10 Chinese brands are just going to leave Russia altogether, because there are no sales there anymore. They'll just sell the inventory and leave.
Okay, so a crisis all over the board. I wanted to talk about something else. Yes, I'm sorry, I'm stalling just a little bit. So you mentioned the car sales. Yes, you did say that LADA had been helped by the state. How big was that help, and like, is it at all possible for it to be renewed?
It's ongoing. So they introduced, like I said, the over $5,000 recycling fee for imported foreign cars, and that's going to rise every year for the next 5 years. So at the end, it's going to be more than 10,000 for an imported car. That's a way to kill the competition in its price segment. So up to 2 million rubles, it's expected that there's only going to be LADAs. The other thing they're doing is, for example, they're going to introduce from October 1st a requirement that all taxi cars are Russian, which is a big problem. As I said, when taxi companies tried to use Russian GLaDOS for Russian cars in general, they had serious problems. They might try the Moskvich, but there's not that much of a production of Moskvich cars right now in Russia. There's 4,000, I think, per quarter. I have to check. I have the figures over here. Yes, in Q1, Moskvich sold only 3,700. So that's sort of the numbers we're talking about. That requirement for taxis to only be Russian domestically produced cars is going to kill the taxi industry to a large degree, because it means that everyone has to change their fleet. Like I said, the availability of spare parts for LADAs, if you're a taxi company, you need them quickly and in large amounts, is not there. And they're not as reliable as the alternatives that they're driving right now. There's a reason that all of Eastern Europe mostly drives Korean cars for taxis.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's another type of vehicles that you haven't mentioned so far, and that is absolutely crucial. It's the one that are used in agriculture and mostly tractors. Do you have some idea about this? Are they are there the single silver lining in the story, or are they suffering as well?
Oh no, there it's much worse. So what they did was yes, there are no good sides to this story. Maybe the only good side is if you're Ural, because the state wants 1,200 trucks from you every month, and that's the limit of what you can build. So you're fully booked. That's the only good story. Everything else is worse or much worse. So in 2024, the sales of Russian domestic agricultural equipment, 40% of the production went unsold. And in 2025, in Q1, there was a further 30% decrease of the sales. So they're completely, yes,
Year on year. So basically 65% drop compared to
yes.
2023. No, 2022.
And on top of
Wow.
that, what they did introduce to save that industry was they introduced even bigger recycling fees. So there, the recycling fees are in the millions of rubles. Now, what that made is that no one was buying foreign imported tractors. The problem is that people didn't like Russian tractors. So eventually, to help the agricultural industry, which is also suffering and is going into a decline, they introduced a quota system to import foreign tractors without the recycling fee, and you have to go to the Ministry of Agriculture, request a part of that quota, and then they give you the quota, then you import the tractor, and then you can use it in your farm. That's how much they don't want to buy Russian equipment, to the point that the ministry that banned the sale partially, because it's also from the Ministry of Industry Trade, not just Ministry of Agriculture, created an exemption for its own ban so that farmers could buy tractors. And the other story there is that Belarus is actually stealing their lunch. So if you have a tractor from a Russian company, you're going to get 7.5% of the interest on a loan for it for the first year as a subsidy from the government. And what Belarus does instead is, for the entire term of the financing of that tractor, it actually gives you a 50% subsidy of the interest on that loan. So right now, instead of having a Belarusian sector that's something like 15%, it's closer to 30% of the entire Russian sector of agricultural equipment that's produced in the Eurasian Union. So Belarus is actually making a killing off of Russian domestic production.
Wow. So they make a mess. It reminds me of a famous economist who once said, tariff is the most beautiful language. It's the most beautiful word in the English language, after the word God and religion. So they're managing to create a massive mess. But the result is that the import from China plus from Belarus is covering at least part of the decline, or is it? Are they still starving of
They're still
industry?
starving. They're still not selling
Or
enough
rather the
because,
agriculture?
again, the Russian domestic producer was never fully sufficient for the Russian market. It required a lot of imports, and not just from China. It was usually focused on Western imports as well. So in that regard, the agricultural equipment market is in an even deeper hole than everyone else. The only ones that are in as bad as a situation are probably the road working equipment, specialized equipment for road construction, because, and this is also going to impact the Russian automotive industry, investment in infrastructure by the state is down across the board. So roads will get worse and worse over the next few years. That's not going to help anyone, but it's even worse for road construction equipment.
Yeah, which is going to do wonders for the cab drivers. Okay, so you heard it here first, boys. The Russian Tsar will be toppled by a taxi driver revolution at some point in the near future. Okay, thanks. Is there another aspect of the situation that we haven't covered yet?
Well, there's the plans that the car companies that used to be Western still have some plans to open additional production. So, for example, the ex-Volkswagen factory in Kaluga wants to produce 100,000 cars a year. I don't think they'll manage it. The other thing is that the ex-Citroën car plant is also producing cars, but at the rate of 25,000 cars a year. They're importing kits from China, and they're setting them up and assembling them as for production. And I think that's about it. What I didn't mention is just how severe things are for the truck logistic industry, because there, when it comes to the leasing companies, they've built an inventory of something like 20,000 trucks because of people returning their trucks back. And right now, most of them are doing releasings of existing equipment instead of importing new equipment. So in the case of the truck industry, I think freight and logistics via roads in Russia, because prices keep falling down, is just going to die. It was already operating at a 3% margin, and in Q1 we saw that the freight rates dropped another 12%. That's just in Q1 2025. So I don't think there's going to be any good news coming out of that industry soon. And again, that's sort of your proxy for how well industry as a whole and the economy as a whole is going in Russia. It's seeing a decline across the board, and when it comes to the civilian side. Doesn't matter that the Russian military industry is doing sort of okay. We're seeing that the civilian side of the industry is just collapsing, and automotive industry was a big part of that. The automotive industry, that is.
Okay, thanks. That's a good summary. So I guess if people have questions, one of them is appearing on the screen right now. Let me read it loud. Do you have statistics on the used vehicle markets? You did mention that they were hit by more expensive credits, but what is the impact that it has on the market itself?
It's also dropping, but not as fast as the new car market. I have to probably do a thread on that, because right now I don't have the statistics handy, but I think it was something like another 10% was dropping in the used car market. But it's a very different market, because the average age of a car in Russia is something like 17 years. So that's why, for example, for last year, one of the most sold used car was the Lada 2107, which first entered production.
Oh, is it?
What?
Is it the one we see in the video that Erlen posted announcing the thread,
Yes.
the
Yes.
cast?
Yes.
Okay. So when was it built
I think
initially?
it was built initially in the 80s, mid to late 80s.
Hey, the best. What are you talking about? The best stuff were built in the 80s. Good for them.
So that's why it's a very different market. And another thing is that it's also a bit regional, because on the side of when you go to the Russian Far East, you're seeing actually an uptick in the imports of Western used cars right now, which is something that you don't see in the rest of Russia. So that there's a bit of a revival there.
Those coming from Japan?
Yes, but again, used cars.
Oh, I thought that traffic had sort of ended, but good to know. There's another question.
It's nowhere near
yeah.
as big as it was, but it's recuperating compared to the previous month.
Okay, interesting. So there's another question. Is there also the problem, as there is in other areas, that the salary is not increasing enough and qualified people are leaving? So you did mention that they're better paid than the average, but then again, the average is not crazy, so they could get probably more money if they were in the food delivery business.
Yes, if you're in the food delivery business, it's even better than if you're in the bus driving industry or you're looking for a logistics company. Food delivery is doing great. Also, deliveries to warehouses for companies that are online marketplaces, those are doing great. But if you're a driver just in the traditional transportation sector, you're not doing great. As for the companies that are constructing cars and trucks, they're paying okay, and they're regularly increasing their salaries. Although the salaries won't match something like I've seen in the aerospace industry, where they're offering 210,000 rubles for a 6-day shift, a 6-day work week with 10 to 12-hour shifts. That's not being offered for car companies. They're closer to something like 100,000 rubles. But even if we take, for example, WAZ, which is offering such salaries, if we compare that to the producers of the BMP at Kurgan Machine Zavod, they're offering something like the average salary there is 103,000 rubles. So it's comparable to parts of the defense industry, which is doing the same thing.
And in practice, does it mean that they've lost a lot of people to the defense industry? Is it why they're not managing to recruit, or to directly recruiting for the army, or is it not the problem there? It's just a pool they can draw from.
The pool has diminished. They still have enough workers. Like I said, they're overproducing.
Okay. There's another question, and then we're getting close to the hour. So we will release you because it's really late in where you are. Could you also speak to trucking companies and logistics generally, please? So you had already broached the subject.
I think I covered it with all I had, I think, at this point. The trucking market is dying. That's the long and short of it. So this is for heavy vehicles in general. So if you're driving trucks, you're usually doing it for a very big company, because the smaller ones are getting eaten. And even the big companies have a lot of their fleet is sitting idle. There's no demand for it, or they can't find enough drivers. They're poaching drivers from the Russian public transportation service. So a lot of places have public transport that is done by private companies, where you have a private company taking over a specific route, and every year they do auctions for those routes. And for example, in Zabalkaysky Krai, last year in December, when they tried to do an auction for 12 routes to find a carrier for them, so a company that's going to do those routes as a public transportation service, they found only one for the 12. So only one carrier came, and it came only for one of the 12 routes. The other 11 stayed without any carriers. So that's the other issue that this is feeding into, this movement away from the transportation services. So Russian public transport is not generating enough demand for Russian bus sales, not generating enough demand for Russian light commercial vehicle sales and Russian minibuses. And mini buses over 5 tons, I think, are down in sales 17%. No, buses under 5 tons are down sales 70%. Buses over 5 tons are actually down 41%. So that side is being eaten. The only place where that's reversed is in Moscow, where it's the state-funded public transport company which is having a hard time finding drivers, and the private companies are actually getting better deals for drivers than the Moscow state company. And they can poach drivers and offer them something like 200,000 rubles per month, whereas Moscow can't offer as much. They offer something between 110 and 200,000 rubles for a driver. So that's the dynamic in the whole industry when it comes to professional drivers. They're just being poached away by delivery services, by the internal logistics of big warehouse operating companies, and in some cases by the state, or as it said in Moscow, the private public transport. That's another thing that we should see a decrease in. So there should probably be a large drop in public transportation services in Russia over this year because companies are going bust. And it's happening. I know I posted a thread about Altai, but it's happening all over the place. I've seen the same stories, the same issues, the same salary price points all over Russia.
Okay, well, that's I guess that's a good way to end the conversation. Thanks a lot. So to summarize, as Prune 60 would say, it's bad, but it's going to get worse. Stan, before we close the cast, do you have something else to say? Maybe what are you working on at the moment?
I was trying to gather enough information to do a survey of all the public transport cuts and ticket increases for all of Russia, but I still can't find enough time. And it's already been 2 months since I started doing it. But that's my big plan, to do a summary of everything that we've seen, because I haven't seen it covered by anyone. And it's a big deal because they tried for a few years within the war to keep ticket prices steady. And then by late last year, they said that they had to keep prices increasing because the industry was going to die. And they're at the point where they increased the price of tickets, but the industry is still dying as a whole. So it's one of those things which I like to say that Russia can either be at war or take care of itself, not both at the same time. It's a choice.
Yeah, it's a choice they've made. Okay, Stan, thank you infinitely for your patience. Actually, the cast was meant to be yesterday, and then I had a slight issue, and Stanimir was nice enough to reschedule for today. So thanks immensely. That was absolutely fascinating. Yet again, of course, you're as ever very, very welcome back whenever you want. And more generally, if you enjoy the conversation, there's a lot more interesting subject that you can find on YouTube, on Tochnyi, the Tochnyi channel. If you are not a member, you're welcome to join. You can also leave a like, that never hurts. And you can also follow Stanimir on Blue Sky, where he's posting every day the sort of an overview of the most interesting news of the on the Russian economy on that day. It's a fascinating read. It's very compact and yeah, one of the best thing you'll find on the on those guys. So with not further ado, thank you everyone for listening. I hope to see you very, very soon and to talk to you very, very soon. Stan, thanks immensely. And everyone, have an excellent one.
Bye.
Goodbye.
On behalf of the brave.